The wrench slipped from Jessica Harper's grease-stained fingers as the unmistakable roar of 6 F/A-18 Super Hornets thundered overhead at precisely 0800 hours. She didn't need to look up from the engine bay of the disabled F-16 to know that the Navy's Blue Angels demonstration team had arrived at Nellis Air Force Base for their annual joint training exercise. The sound of those perfectly synchronized Pratt & Whitney engines sent an involuntary shiver down her spine, a reaction she had learned to suppress over the past 8 years of working as a senior aircraft maintenance technician. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 29, Jessica had become the most reliable mechanic in the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron, known throughout the Nevada base for her uncanny ability to diagnose complex mechanical problems that stumped even the most experienced engineers. Her small frame, barely 5'4", seemed almost comical next to the massive fighter jets she serviced, but her hands moved across aircraft systems with the confidence of someone who understood every bolt, wire, and hydraulic line in the most sophisticated military machines ever built. What nobody at Nellis knew was that Jessica Harper had once been Second Lieutenant Jessica Michelle Harper, a pilot who had washed out of advanced flight training at Shepherd Air Force Base after a catastrophic incident that had nearly cost her everything. The crash had been ruled pilot error, a devastating verdict that had ended her flying career before it truly began, and forced her into the maintenance ranks where she had hidden her true capabilities for nearly a decade. The morning sun was already brutal across the high desert landscape of southern Nevada as Jessica continued her inspection of the troubled F-16C Fighting Falcon that had been grounded for 3 days with intermittent engine control problems. The aircraft belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Michael Davidson, one of the squadron's most demanding pilots, who had complained about subtle power fluctuations during high-G maneuvers that the diagnostic computers couldn't detect. Jessica had been assigned to the case after 2 other mechanics had pronounced the aircraft airworthy, only to have Davidson bring it back with the same complaints after each test flight. Her reputation for solving impossible problems had made her the squadron's last resort for aircraft that refused to cooperate with conventional troubleshooting procedures. She had been working since dawn, methodically checking every component in the engine control system with a thoroughness that went far beyond standard maintenance protocols. Her approach was different from other mechanics because she understood how each system felt from the pilot's perspective, knowledge that came from countless hours in cockpits during her abbreviated flying career. The FADEC unit looked normal on the surface, but Jessica's trained eye caught a microscopic stress fracture in one of the connection housings that would cause intermittent signal degradation under the extreme conditions of combat maneuvering. The flaw was so subtle that it had escaped detection by the sophisticated diagnostic equipment, but Jessica's combination of technical knowledge and pilot experience had led her directly to the problem. Master Sergeant Robert Chen approached the aircraft as Jessica was documenting her findings, his weathered face showing the skepticism that had become his default expression after 22 years of supervising aircraft maintenance. Chen had seen too many young mechanics claim to have found problems that more experienced technicians had missed, and he had learned to be cautious about approving expensive repairs based on questionable diagnoses. "What's the verdict, Harper?" Chen asked, reviewing the maintenance log on his tablet computer. "Davidson's been raising hell about this bird for 3 days. And I'm running out of explanations for why we can't fix whatever's bothering him." Jessica emerged from the engine bay, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail that somehow remained neat, despite hours of crawling through tight spaces. Her green eyes held the focused intensity that Chen had learned to recognize as a sign that she had discovered something significant. "Microfracture in the FADEC housing," Jessica said, handing Chen a magnifying glass and pointing to the nearly invisible flaw. "It's causing intermittent signal degradation that only manifests under high-G stress conditions. The diagnostic computers can't catch it because the failure occurs too quickly and restores itself before the monitoring systems can register the anomaly." Quote. Chen examined the connection housing carefully, squinting through the magnifying glass at the hairline crack that Jessica had identified. After several minutes of inspection, he handed the glass back with a grudging nod of acknowledgement. "I can barely see it even with magnification," Chen admitted. "How did you spot something that small without equipment?" Jessica shrugged, unwilling to explain that her pilot training had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of system degradation that could mean the difference between life and death at 30,000 feet. "Just experience with these systems. she said simply. The symptoms Davidson described pointed to signal processing issues, and this housing is under the most stress during high-G maneuvers. The arrival of the Blue Angels had created additional complications for the maintenance schedule, as base operations had prioritized aircraft preparation for the joint training exercises that would showcase Air Force and Navy capabilities to visiting congressional delegations and defense contractors. Jessica's F-16 repair had been designated as critical because Davidson was scheduled to participate in mock combat scenarios with the Navy demonstration pilots. Technical Sergeant Amanda Walsh joined the diagnostic session, carrying a replacement FATIC housing and the specialized tools required for the delicate installation procedure. Walsh was one of the few female mechanics in the squadron, and she had developed a professional friendship with Jessica based on their shared experience of proving themselves in a male-dominated field. "Heard you crack the Davidson mystery," Walsh said, beginning the process of carefully removing the damaged component. "That's the third impossible diagnosis you've made this month. People are starting to wonder if you've got some kind of supernatural mechanical intuition." Jessica assisted with the component replacement, her movements precise and economical as she guided the delicate electronics into position. The work required absolute attention to detail because even minor installation errors could result in catastrophic system failures during flight operations. "Just lucky, I guess," Jessica replied, though both women knew that luck had nothing to do with her consistent success rate. Jessica's diagnostic abilities came from understanding aircraft systems from both mechanical and operational perspectives, a combination that was rare among maintenance personnel, who had never experienced the demands of actual flying. The Blue Angels' arrival had transformed the normally quiet maintenance hangar into a hub of intense activity as Air Force personnel prepared to host the Navy's premier demonstration team. The joint training exercise represented an opportunity for both services to share techniques and procedures while conducting realistic training scenarios that tested the limits of both aircraft and pilots. Captain Thomas Bradley, the Blue Angels' commanding officer, had gained a reputation as one of the most demanding leaders in naval aviation, with standards of precision and professionalism that pushed his pilots to achieve levels of performance that bordered on the impossible. His demonstration team had been flying together for 2 years, developing the seamless coordination that made their aerial displays appear effortless to civilian audiences while requiring split-second timing and absolute trust among the pilots. Jessica watched from a distance as the Blue Angels pilots conducted their pre-flight briefings, their crisp blue flight suits and professional, bearing a stark contrast to the grease-stained coveralls and casual demeanor of the maintenance crews. The pilots moved with the confident precision of professionals who had mastered one of the most challenging careers in military service, and Jessica felt the familiar ache of unfulfilled dreams that had never completely faded despite 8 years of forced acceptance. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, the Blue Angels' first female pilot in 5 years, was particularly impressive as she reviewed flight procedures with Captain Bradley. Morrison had broken through barriers that Jessica had once hoped to shatter herself, achieving the kind of flying career that represented the pinnacle of military aviation achievement. The irony wasn't lost on Jessica that she now spent her days servicing aircraft that she could probably fly better than their assigned pilots, using knowledge and skills that had been gained through years of intensive training that had ultimately led nowhere. The mechanical work was satisfying in its own way, but it represented a compromise with dreams that had been too powerful to abandon completely. Master Sergeant Chen returned to check on the FATIC installation progress, his tablet displaying the updated maintenance schedule that had been compressed to accommodate the joint training requirements. The Blue Angels would be conducting formation flights with Air Force aircraft, creating logistical challenges that required perfect coordination between maintenance teams and flight operations. "How much longer on the Davidson bird?" Chen asked, watching as Jessica completed the final connection checks on the replacement component. "Bradley wants to conduct compatibility tests with all participating aircraft before tomorrow's exercises begin." Jessica ran through the post-installation diagnostic sequence, monitoring the engine control responses on her handheld test unit as the system cycled through their operational parameters. The new FATIC housing was functioning perfectly, eliminating the signal degradation that had been causing Davidson's control problems. "Ready for engine run-up in about 10 minutes, Jessica reported. "All systems are showing normal responses, and the intermittent fault has been eliminated." Davidson should be able to participate in the exercises without any performance limitations. The engine test went smoothly, with the F-16's Pratt & Whitney power plant responding perfectly to throttle inputs and showing none of the hesitation that had characterized the previous performance issues. Jessica monitored the test from the ground, watching as the aircraft's systems performed flawlessly under the stress conditions that had previously revealed the FDEC housing problem. As the successful repair was documented and the aircraft was returned to flight status, Jessica felt the familiar satisfaction that came from solving complex problems and restoring sophisticated machines to perfect working order. The work didn't fulfill her dreams of flying, but it provided a connection to aviation that had sustained her through years of professional disappointment and personal compromise. What she didn't know was that her exceptional mechanical abilities and deep understanding of aircraft systems had been noticed by people whose opinions could change everything, and that the arrival of the Blue Angels would create circumstances that would finally reveal the extraordinary pilot who had been hiding beneath the maintenance technician's coveralls for nearly a decade. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The emergency klaxon pierced the desert air at 1,347 hours, sending maintenance crews scrambling across the flight line as the distinctive wail signaled an aircraft in distress. Jessica dropped her torque wrench and sprinted toward the crash truck staging area, her heart pounding as she recognized the engine note of a troubled F-A-18 Super Hornet approaching the runway with obvious mechanical difficulties. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison's Blue Angels jet was trailing a thin stream of hydraulic fluid as she fought to maintain control during her emergency approach to Nellis. The No. 5 aircraft had suffered a catastrophic hydraulic failure during a routine practice maneuver, leaving Morrison with minimal flight control authority and a rapidly deteriorating situation that threatened to become fatal within minutes. From her position near the emergency vehicles, Jessica watched Morrison's approach with the trained eye of someone who understood exactly what the pilot was experiencing in the cockpit. The Super Hornet was flying on backup systems, its flight controls responding sluggishly to inputs that normally would have produced immediate and precise reactions. Morrison was fighting to maintain approach speed while compensating for asymmetric control responses that made the aircraft want to roll unpredictably. Captain Bradley's voice crackled over the emergency frequency as he coordinated the rescue efforts from his position in the mobile command unit. Angel 5. You're showing a good approach angle, but your descent rate is still too high. Try to arrest the sink with whatever power you have available. Morrison's response revealed the strain in her voice as she battled the failing aircraft. Copy, boss. I'm at maximum available power, but the hydraulic loss is affecting engine response. I'm going to need some luck to make this work. The gathered maintenance crews watched in tense silence as Morrison lined up for what would either be a masterful emergency landing or a catastrophic crash that could end her flying career permanently. Jessica found herself unconsciously running through the emergency procedures that Morrison was executing, her muscle memory from pilot training automatically calculating airspeeds, descent rates, and control inputs that would be required for a successful recovery. Technical Sergeant Walsh moved beside Jessica, her face pale with concern as she watched the drama unfolding above them. She's too steep and too fast, Walsh whispered. At that approach angle, she's going to hit hard even if she makes the runway. Jessica nodded grimly, recognizing the same dangerous flight parameters that Walsh had identified. Morrison was caught in an impossible situation where her limited control authority prevented her from achieving the precise approach profile needed for a safe landing. The backup hydraulic system was providing enough control for basic flight, but not enough for the fine adjustments required during the critical final moments of an emergency approach. The Super Hornet crossed the runway threshold with its landing gear extended but its approach still dangerously unstable. Morrison had managed to reduce her sink rate slightly, but the aircraft was oscillating in pitch and roll as the compromised flight controls struggled to maintain stable flight. The emergency foam trucks positioned themselves along the runway, their crews ready to respond to whatever outcome the next 30 seconds would produce. Jessica held her breath as Morrison flared the aircraft for touchdown, using every available control input to cushion the impact and prevent the kind of hard landing that could destroy the landing gear and send the jet skidding across the runway in a shower of sparks and debris. The main wheels contacted the concrete with a jarring impact that sent vibrations through the ground, but the landing gear held and Morrison managed to maintain directional control as the aircraft rolled toward the emergency response teams. The successful emergency landing drew cheers from the assembled ground crews, but Jessica's attention was focused on the technical aspects of Morrison's performance during the crisis. The Blue Angel's pilot had demonstrated exceptional skill and composure under pressure, making split-second decisions that had turned a potentially fatal situation into a manageable emergency recovery. As Morrison shut down the damaged Super Hornet and climbed from the cockpit, she was immediately surrounded by medical personnel and maintenance technicians, who began the process of securing the aircraft and assessing the extent of the hydraulic system failure. Jessica watched from a distance as the Blue Angels team rallied around their teammate, providing the kind of professional support that characterized elite military units during crisis situations. Master Sergeant Chen approached Jessica with his tablet computer, displaying the preliminary damage assessment that would determine whether Morrison's aircraft could be repaired in time for the scheduled joint training exercises. The hydraulic failure had been caused by a catastrophic seal failure in the primary system, resulting in complete fluid loss and backup system degradation that had made controlled flight nearly impossible. "Looks like Angel 5 is going to be down for at least a week," Chen observed, studying the maintenance requirements listed on his tablet. "The hydraulic system needs complete replacement and will have to inspect the entire airframe for stress damage from the emergency landing. Morrison's lucky to be walking away from this one." The hydraulic failure had created a significant problem for the Blue Angels' demonstration schedule, as their precision flying routines required all 6 aircraft to be operational simultaneously. Captain Bradley was already coordinating with his maintenance chief to determine whether replacement aircraft could be obtained from other Navy units, but the specialized configuration required for demonstration flying made substitutions complicated and time-consuming. Jessica volunteered to assist with the preliminary damage assessment, her expertise with hydraulic systems making her valuable for the detailed inspection that would be required before any repair work could begin. As she began examining the failed components, she discovered that the seal failure had been caused by a manufacturing defect that should have been caught during routine maintenance inspections. The defective seal showed signs of premature deterioration that indicated a material flaw rather than normal wear patterns. Jessica photographed the evidence and documented her findings for the investigation report that would be forwarded to the aircraft manufacturer and Navy safety officials. Her attention to detail during the inspection process impressed the Blue Angels maintenance team, who recognized her thoroughness and technical competence. Lieutenant Commander David Parker, the Blue Angels maintenance officer, observed Jessica's work with growing interest as she methodically examined each component of the failed hydraulic system. Parker had 20 years of experience with Navy aircraft maintenance, and he could recognize exceptional technical ability when he saw it displayed in the field. "Your diagnostic approach is unusually systematic," Parker commented, as Jessica completed her component inspection. "Most Air Force mechanics I've worked with focus on the obvious failure points, but you're examining the entire system for related problems. That's a Navy approach to troubleshooting." Jessica looked up from her work, momentarily surprised by the observation. "Just trying to be thorough," she replied carefully. "Hydraulic failures usually have multiple contributing factors, so it's important to identify all the issues before beginning repairs." Parker nodded approvingly, making notes in his maintenance log about Jessica's performance during the emergency response. "Have you worked on Navy aircraft before? Your familiarity with Super Hornet systems seems more extensive than what I'd expect from an Air Force technician." The question made Jessica uncomfortable, as it touched on areas of her background that she preferred to keep private. Her knowledge of Navy aircraft systems came from cross-training programs during her pilot education, when she had learned to fly both Air Force and Navy aircraft as part of her preparation for potential joint service assignments. "I've studied Navy maintenance manuals as part of professional development," Jessica said evasively. "Inter-service cooperation requires understanding different aircraft systems and procedures." The explanation satisfied Parker, who was impressed by Jessica's dedication to professional education and her willingness to learn about aircraft systems beyond her immediate responsibilities. He made a mental note to discuss her performance with Captain Bradley, who was always looking for exceptional personnel who might be valuable for Navy assignments. As the damage assessment continued, Jessica discovered additional problems that had been masked by the primary hydraulic failure. Secondary system components showed signs of stress that indicated they had been operating beyond design parameters, probably as a result of the pilot's efforts to maintain control during the emergency. The findings suggested that Morrison's landing had been even more challenging than initially apparent. The discovery of secondary damage extended the estimated repair time and reinforced the decision to ground Morrison's aircraft for comprehensive inspection and component replacement. Jessica's thoroughness during the assessment had identified problems that could have caused additional failures if the aircraft had been returned to service without complete system overhaul. Technical Sergeant Walsh joined the inspection team as Jessica documented the final components of her damage assessment. Walsh had been watching Jessica's work with growing amazement at the depth of knowledge being displayed by someone who was supposedly just an Air Force maintenance technician. "You found more problems in 2 hours than the preliminary inspection identified in 4, Walsh observed. "Either you're incredibly lucky, or you know something about these aircraft that the rest of us don't." Jessica finished her documentation and began gathering her tools, uncomfortable with the attention that her performance was generating among the Navy personnel. "Just experience with hydraulic systems," she said dismissively. "The principles are the same regardless of aircraft type." But even as she deflected the questions about her expertise, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that her exceptional performance during the emergency had attracted exactly the kind of attention she had been trying to avoid for 8 years. The Blue Angels maintenance team was clearly impressed by her abilities, and their interest could lead to inquiries about her background that might reveal the carefully hidden truth about her previous flying career. As the day shift ended and the damaged Super Hornet was towed to the maintenance hangar for repairs, Jessica reflected on the events that had thrust her into the spotlight, despite her efforts to remain anonymous. Morrison's emergency landing had been a reminder of the risks and challenges that made military aviation simultaneously terrifying and irresistible, and Jessica felt the familiar ache of missing the profession that had once defined her identity. What she didn't realize was that her exceptional performance during the crisis had been noticed by the one person whose opinion could change everything, and that Captain Bradley was already planning to investigate the mysterious Air Force technician whose abilities seemed far too advanced for her supposed background and experience. Captain Thomas Bradley stood in the early morning shadows of Hangar 7, watching Jessica Harper conduct pre-flight inspections on the replacement F-A-18 Super Hornet that had arrived overnight from Naval Air Station Lemoore. What had started as casual observation had evolved into focused scrutiny, as Bradley noticed details about Jessica's inspection technique that seemed inconsistent with her supposed background as an Air Force maintenance technician. Jessica moved around the aircraft with a purposeful efficiency that went beyond mechanical familiarity. Her hands traced control surfaces with the practiced touch of someone who understood how each component affected flight characteristics. When she checked the engine intakes, she positioned herself with the spatial awareness of someone who had personally experienced the dangers of jet blast and foreign object damage. Most tellingly, her inspection sequence followed Navy procedures rather than Air Force protocols. Lieutenant Commander Parker approached Bradley with the overnight maintenance reports, his expression reflecting the same curiosity that had been growing among the Blue Angels team since Jessica's performance during Morrison's emergency landing. "Sir, I've been reviewing the technical assessment reports from yesterday's hydraulic failure investigation. Harper's documentation is more comprehensive than what I typically see from experienced Navy technicians." Bradley accepted the reports and scanned Jessica's detailed analysis of the component failures, noting the sophisticated understanding of system interactions that characterized her recommendations. "Have you run a background check on her service record?" he asked quietly. "Initial review shows standard Air Force maintenance career progression," Parker replied. 8 years at Nellis, consistently high performance evaluations, specialized training in multiple aircraft systems, but there are some gaps in her early service record that might warrant deeper investigation. The conversation was interrupted when Jessica approached their position, carrying a clipboard with the completed pre-flight inspection results. Her professional demeanor remained steady, despite the obvious attention she was receiving from the Blue Angels command structure, but Bradley detected subtle signs of discomfort that suggested she was aware of their interest. "Sir, the replacement aircraft is fully operational and ready for integration into your training schedule," Jessica reported to Parker, handing him the inspection documentation. "All systems are within normal parameters, and the airframe shows no signs of stress or unusual wear patterns." Bradley stepped forward, studying Jessica's face as he spoke. "Harper, isn't it? I understand you were instrumental in identifying the secondary damage on Angel 5 yesterday. That level of diagnostic capability is impressive for someone with your listed experience." Jessica met his gaze steadily, but Bradley caught a momentary flash of wariness that confirmed his growing suspicion that she was hiding something significant about her background. "Just thorough training, sir. Air Force maintenance standards require comprehensive system knowledge." "I'm sure they do," Bradley replied, his tone remaining conversational despite the underlying intensity of his scrutiny. "Tell me, what's your assessment of the handling characteristics we can expect from this replacement aircraft compared to our regular demonstration jets?" The question was a deliberate test, requiring knowledge that went far beyond mechanical systems into the realm of actual flying experience. Jessica hesitated for just a moment before responding, her answer revealing a depth of understanding that no amount of maintenance training could provide. The replacement bird will have slightly different control response timing due to variations in hydraulic system calibration, Jessica said carefully. The pilot will need to adjust for approximately 15 milliseconds of additional lag during rapid control inputs, particularly during high-G transitions and formation flying where precision timing is critical. Bradley and Parker exchanged meaningful glances. Jessica's assessment was not only technically accurate, but demonstrated the kind of practical flying knowledge that could only come from extensive cockpit experience. No maintenance technician, regardless of training, would understand the subtle timing differences that affected pilot performance during precision formation flying. That's a very specific assessment, Bradley observed. How would you know about control response timing from a pilot's perspective? Jessica realized immediately that her answer had revealed too much about her background, but attempting to backtrack would only create additional suspicion. Simulator training, she said, offering a plausible explanation that was technically truthful, while concealing the full extent of her flying experience. Cross-training programs include pilot perspective education to help maintenance personnel understand operational requirements. The explanation was reasonable enough to avoid immediate confrontation, but Bradley filed the information away for future investigation. Jessica's knowledge clearly exceeded what any simulator training could provide, and her defensive response suggested she was actively concealing significant aspects of her background. Major Rebecca Stone, the Blue Angels operations officer, joined the group as they discussed the training schedule modifications required to integrate the replacement aircraft into the demonstration routine. Stone had been conducting her own informal investigation into base personnel who might have relevant experience for an urgent Navy requirement that had emerged following Morrison's emergency landing. Captain, I've been reviewing personnel files for potential candidates who might assist with an unusual training requirement, Stone said, glancing meaningfully at Jessica. We need someone with both technical expertise and practical flying knowledge to help develop emergency procedures for formation flying with degraded aircraft systems. Bradley understood immediately that Stone was creating an opportunity to test Jessica's capabilities under controlled conditions. What kind of assistance are you looking for, Major? Someone who can provide technical consultation during simulator sessions where we practice formation flying with various system failures, Stone explained. The consultant would need to understand both the mechanical aspects of system degradation and the piloting challenges of maintaining formation control under emergency conditions. Jessica found herself caught in an increasingly complex situation where avoiding the assignment would seem suspicious, but accepting it would require demonstrating knowledge that could expose her carefully hidden background. The Blue Angels team was clearly testing her, using increasingly sophisticated methods to determine whether she possessed capabilities that went far beyond her official duties. I'd be happy to provide technical support if my supervisors approve the assignment, Jessica said, attempting to deflect responsibility for the decision while buying time to consider her options. Master Sergeant Chen appeared as if summoned, carrying orders that had been transmitted from base command, authorizing Jessica's temporary assignment to support Blue Angels training operations. The coincidental timing suggested that the Navy officers had been coordinating their investigation more carefully than Jessica had initially realized. Harper, you've been detailed to assist with specialized training requirements for our visiting Navy unit, Chen announced, handing her the official assignment paperwork. Duration is indefinite, but the priority level indicates this comes from pretty high up the chain of command. Jessica accepted the assignment with outward professionalism, while internally calculating the implications of extended exposure to pilots who were specifically trained to observe details and recognize deception. The Blue Angels were elite performers whose careers depended on noticing subtle variations in behavior and performance, making them particularly dangerous opponents for someone trying to maintain a false identity. The first simulator session was scheduled for 1,400 hours in the Advanced Flight Training Facility, where Jessica would observe formation flying scenarios while providing technical consultation about system failures and their effects on aircraft performance. The assignment represented both an opportunity to return to the cockpit environment she missed desperately, and a significant risk of exposure that could destroy the carefully constructed anonymity she had maintained for 8 years. Lieutenant Morrison joined the preparation session despite her recent emergency landing experience. her presence adding another layer of complexity to Jessica's situation. Morrison had demonstrated exceptional skill during her hydraulic failure, and her first-hand experience with emergency procedures would make her particularly sensitive to inconsistencies in Jessica's supposed technical background. "I'm looking forward to working with you on this project," Morrison said as they reviewed the simulator scenarios. "Your analysis of my hydraulic failure was more insightful than what I typically see from maintenance personnel. It's clear you understand the pilot's perspective on system degradation." Jessica nodded politely while internally analyzing Morrison's statement for hidden meaning. The Blue Angels pilot was clearly probing for information about Jessica's background, using casual conversation to gather intelligence about her true capabilities and experience. The simulator facility contained state-of-the-art equipment that could replicate virtually any flying scenario with complete fidelity to actual aircraft performance. As Jessica entered the briefing room and saw the sophisticated cockpit replicas and formation flying displays, she felt the familiar surge of excitement and longing that had never completely faded despite years of forced separation from flying. Captain Bradley began the briefing session by outlining the specific emergency scenarios they would be practicing, each one designed to test formation flying skills under increasingly challenging conditions. Jessica recognized that the scenarios had been carefully selected to require the kind of detailed technical and operational knowledge that could only come from extensive flying experience. "Today we'll be focusing on hydraulic degradation during formation flying," Bradley announced, his eyes fixed on Jessica as he spoke. "Our technical consultant will be monitoring system performance and providing real-time analysis of how mechanical failures affect formation control and pilot workload." As the briefing continued, Jessica realized that she was walking into a carefully constructed trap designed to reveal the truth about her background. The Blue Angels team had obviously coordinated their investigation, using multiple approaches to gather evidence about her hidden flying experience. The simulator session would provide them with definitive proof of whether she possessed the kind of advanced knowledge that could only come from actual pilot training. The moment of truth was approaching, and Jessica faced the choice between maintaining her carefully constructed deception or revealing the truth about her past that could change everything about her carefully controlled future. The simulator cockpit felt like coming home after 8 years in exile. Jessica's hands found the controls with muscle memory that time had failed to erode, her fingers automatically adjusting seat position, rudder pedals, and instrument displays with the unconscious precision of someone who had spent thousands of hours in similar environments. The familiar layout of switches, gauges, and multifunction displays triggered a cascade of sensory memories that momentarily overwhelmed her carefully maintained emotional barriers. Captain Bradley watched from the instructor station as Jessica settled into the simulated F-16 cockpit, his trained eye cataloging every movement and reaction. Her body language had changed completely the moment she entered the simulator environment, transforming from the cautious demeanor of a maintenance technician into the confident posture of an experienced pilot. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable to someone with Bradley's experience in evaluating pilot performance. The scenario will begin with a standard 4-ship diamond formation at 20,000 feet, Major Stone announced from the control booth. We'll introduce progressive hydraulic degradation in the number 3 aircraft to simulate the type of emergency that Lieutenant Morrison experienced yesterday. Harper, your job is to monitor the technical aspects of the system failure and provide real-time analysis of how the degradation affects formation flying capability. Jessica nodded, attempting to focus on her supposed role as technical observer while fighting the overwhelming urge to take control of the aircraft and demonstrate the flying skills that had been dormant for nearly a decade. The simulator's visual display showed a perfect blue sky over the Nevada desert, with 3 other F-18s positioned in precise formation around her cockpit position. Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled through the communication system as she began the formation flying exercise from the lead position. "Diamond formation, check-in." "2, came the response from the left-wing position. "3, Jessica heard herself saying automatically, using the standard formation communication protocol before she realized that she had blown her cover completely. Technical observers didn't participate in formation communications, and her instinctive response revealed pilot training that contradicted everything about her supposed background. The communication booth fell silent as Bradley, Stone, and Morrison processed the significance of Jessica's automatic response. She had reacted like a formation pilot rather than a maintenance technician, using proper radio procedures and timing that could only come from extensive formation flying experience. "Interesting," Bradley said quietly into his headset. "Harper, that was a very natural response for someone who's supposed to be observing rather than participating." Jessica felt her carefully constructed deception crumbling around her as she struggled to find an explanation that might salvage the situation. "Sorry, sir. I got caught up in the realism of the simulation. I've listened to so many formation communications during maintenance work that the responses have become automatic." The explanation was weak and unconvincing, but Jessica continued with the exercise while Bradley and his team exchanged meaningful glances in the control booth. The hydraulic failure scenario began as planned, with progressive system degradation that required increasingly sophisticated piloting skills to maintain formation position and control. As the simulated emergency developed, Jessica found herself unconsciously making control inputs that demonstrated advanced formation flying techniques. She maintained perfect position relative to the lead aircraft, despite the progressive loss of hydraulic authority, using subtle power adjustments and control surface coordination that revealed years of specialized training in precision formation flying. Major Stone leaned toward Bradley in the control booth, her voice barely audible over the communication system. "Sir, she's flying that simulation like someone with Blue Angels experience. Those control techniques aren't taught in basic formation training." Bradley nodded grimly, recognizing the same advanced skills that Stone had identified. Jessica's performance was demonstrating capabilities that placed her among the top 1% of military pilots, far beyond what any maintenance technician could possess, regardless of simulator experience or technical training. The hydraulic failure scenario reached its climax as Jessica's simulated aircraft lost primary flight control authority, leaving her with backup systems that provided minimal control capability. Instead of declaring an emergency and braking formation as standard procedures required, Jessica instinctively began using advanced energy management techniques to maintain formation position while preparing for emergency recovery procedures. "Harper," Bradley called over the intercom, "what's your assessment of the aircraft's controllability at this point in the emergency?" Jessica's response came without hesitation, drawn from years of experience with similar scenarios during her Blue Angels training. "Aircraft are controllable, but require constant control inputs to maintain formation position. Recommend reducing formation spacing to provide additional maneuvering room while maintaining visual contact for emergency coordination." The recommendation was tactically sound and demonstrated sophisticated understanding of formation emergency procedures, but it also revealed knowledge that no maintenance technician could possibly possess. Jessica had provided pilot-level analysis of a complex emergency situation, complete with tactical recommendations based on formation flying experience. Lieutenant Morrison's voice came through the communication system with obvious curiosity. "Harper, that's exactly the procedure we use for hydraulic emergencies during demonstration flying. How are you familiar with those specific techniques?" The direct question forced Jessica into a corner where continued deception was impossible. Her performance during the simulation had been too revealing, demonstrating skills and knowledge that could only come from extensive pilot training and formation flying experience. The Blue Angels team had gathered overwhelming evidence that contradicted every aspect of her supposed background. Captain Bradley terminated the simulation exercise and requested that Jessica join them in the briefing room for discussion of her performance. As she climbed from the simulator cockpit, Jessica felt the weight of 8 years of carefully maintained secrecy collapsing under the scrutiny of pilots who were trained to recognize deception and evaluate performance under pressure. The briefing room was arranged like a formal interrogation, with Bradley, Stone, and Morrison seated across a conference table from the single chair designated for Jessica. The atmosphere was professional but intense, reflecting the seriousness of the questions that needed to be answered about her true background and qualifications. "Harper," Bradley began, his tone indicating that the casual phase of their investigation was over, "your performance during that simulation exercise demonstrated flying skills that are inconsistent with your listed background as a maintenance technician. We need honest answers about your actual qualifications and experience." Jessica realized that continued deception was pointless and potentially counterproductive. The Blue Angels team had obviously conducted a thorough investigation and gathered enough evidence to challenge any false explanations she might offer. The moment had arrived when she would either reveal the truth about her background or face formal investigation that would expose everything anyway. "I was a pilot," Jessica said quietly, the words feeling strange after 8 years of denial and concealment. Second Lieutenant Jessica Harper graduated from the Air Force Academy and completed advanced flight training at Shepherd AFB before washing out during tactical training exercises. Major Stone consulted her tablet computer, accessing personnel records that the Blue Angels team had obviously obtained through official channels. According to the records we've reviewed, you were involved in a training accident that resulted in your removal from flight status and reassignment to maintenance duties. The incident report is classified, but it indicates pilot error as the primary cause. Jessica felt the familiar shame and anger that accompanied any discussion of the incident that had ended her flying career. The accident was ruled pilot error, but the circumstances were more complex than the official report indicated. I made a decision that saved lives but violated regulations, and the review board decided that rule following was more important than results. Captain Bradley leaned forward, his expression showing genuine interest rather than judgment. Tell us what really happened, Jessica. We've seen enough of your performance to know that you're not someone who makes careless mistakes or poor decisions under pressure. The invitation to tell her story created an opportunity that Jessica had never expected to receive. For 8 years, she had carried the burden of an official verdict that painted her as an incompetent pilot whose poor judgment had caused a serious accident. The chance to explain the true circumstances to fellow pilots who might understand the complexity of the situation was both terrifying and liberating. Jessica took a deep breath and began recounting the events that had destroyed her flying career and forced her into 8 years of professional exile, hoping that the truth would finally vindicate decisions that had been made in impossible circumstances under pressures that the review board had never understood. The training accident had occurred on a crystalline October morning at Nellis Air Force Base during Jessica's final phase of tactical fighter training, just 6 weeks before her scheduled graduation and assignment to an operational F-16 squadron. She had been flying as wingman in a 4-ship formation conducting simulated air-to-ground attack missions when a catastrophic engine failure in the lead aircraft created a chain of events that would test every aspect of her training and judgment. It was a routine, close air support exercise, Jessica began, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of recounting the incident that had destroyed her dreams. Flight leader was Captain Marcus Webb, an experienced instructor with over 2,000 hours in the F-16. I was flying the number 2 position, my first time as primary wingman, on a complex tactical mission. Captain Bradley remained silent, allowing Jessica to tell her story without interruption while mentally cataloging the details for later analysis. The circumstances she was describing represented exactly the kind of high-pressure situation where pilot judgment and decision-making skills were tested beyond normal training parameters. The mission had been progressing normally until Webb's aircraft suffered a complete engine failure at low altitude during a simulated attack run. Standard procedures required him to declare an emergency and attempt to reach the nearest suitable landing area, but his position placed him directly over a civilian recreational area, where thousands of families were enjoying weekend camping activities in the desert hills east of Las Vegas. Webb's engine seized completely at 800 feet above ground level, Jessica continued, her memory of the incident remaining painfully clear despite 8 years of attempted suppression. He had no power, no altitude for maneuvering, and his glide path was taking him straight toward the Sunrise Mountain camping area where the Park Service estimated over 3,000 people were present that weekend. The emergency had unfolded with terrifying speed as Webb fought to control his powerless F-16 while calculating his rapidly diminishing options. His aircraft was too low for safe ejection over populated areas, and the camping grounds offered no clear spaces large enough for emergency landing attempts. The situation was developing into exactly the kind of nightmare scenario that military pilots trained to avoid, but sometimes faced in real-world operations. Jessica had been maintaining formation position when Webb's emergency developed, placing her in a unique position to observe his aircraft's performance and assess the potential impact zone. Her training had prepared her for formation emergencies, but the specific circumstances of Webb's situation required split-second decision-making that went beyond established procedures. The standard emergency procedure was to maintain formation separation and provide radio relay assistance while the emergency aircraft followed established recovery protocols, Jessica explained. But I could see that Webb's glide angle was taking him directly into the main camping area, and he didn't have enough altitude or energy to maneuver clear of the populated zone. Major Stone consulted her tablet computer, accessing additional details about the incident from official Air Force records. The investigation report indicates that you broke formation without authorization and performed an unauthorized maneuver that resulted in aircraft collision. Can you explain your decision-making process? Jessica's jaw tightened as she confronted the official version of events that had branded her as reckless and incompetent. I made a tactical decision to use my aircraft to alter Webb's flight path and redirect his emergency landing away from the civilian population. The maneuver was risky, but it was the only option that could prevent a catastrophic ground impact in a crowded area. The technique Jessica had attempted was theoretically possible but had never been practiced in training scenarios because of its extreme danger to both aircraft involved. By positioning her F-16 in close proximity to Webb's powerless jet, she could use aerodynamic effects to influence his glide path and potentially steer him toward an unpopulated landing area. I flew inverted formation beneath Webb's aircraft, using wake turbulence and proximity effects to create lift on his starboard wing, Jessica said, her voice reflecting the technical precision that had characterized her flying. The technique required maintaining separation of less than 10 feet while both aircraft were descending rapidly toward the ground. Lieutenant Morrison leaned forward, recognizing the advanced aerodynamic principles that Jessica was describing. That's an extremely dangerous maneuver that requires perfect timing and aircraft control. Even experienced test pilots avoid close proximity flying during emergency situations because of the collision risk. Jessica nodded grimly. The collision risk was significant, but certain ground impact in a populated area was unacceptable. I calculated that the aerodynamic assistance would give Webb enough control authority to reach the emergency landing strip at Indian Springs, which was barely within his glide range. The maneuver had worked exactly as Jessica intended, providing Webb with the additional lift and control authority needed to extend his glide and reach the emergency runway. However, the extreme proximity required for the technique had resulted in minor contact between the two aircraft when Webb's powerless jet experienced an unexpected roll oscillation during the final phase of the assisted glide. The wing contact occurred during the last 30 seconds of the maneuver, Jessica continued. Webb's aircraft had a momentary control loss that brought his wingtip into contact with my vertical stabilizer. The impact was minor, but it caused cosmetic damage to both aircraft and triggered the accident investigation. Captain Bradley studied Jessica's account, recognizing the sophistication of the aerodynamic technique she had described and the split-second decision-making that had characterized her response to the emergency. What was the outcome of Webb's landing? He made it to Indian Springs with minimal damage and no injuries, Jessica replied. The emergency landing was successful, and post-flight analysis confirmed that without aerodynamic assistance, his aircraft would have impacted in the main camping area with potentially catastrophic results for civilian casualties. The investigation that followed had focused on the unauthorized nature of Jessica's maneuver and the aircraft contact that resulted from her decision to break formation. The review board had acknowledged that her actions had probably saved civilian lives, but they concluded that her violation of established emergency procedures represented dangerous independent thinking that was incompatible with military discipline and flight safety. The board ruled that I had exceeded my authority by attempting an unauthorized maneuver without approval from flight leadership or air traffic control, Jessica said, her voice carrying 8 years of accumulated bitterness about the verdict. They determined that my decision to break formation had created additional risk and that proper procedure would have been to maintain formation discipline regardless of the potential ground impact. Major Stone accessed additional files on her tablet, revealing details about the political context that had influenced the investigation outcome. The accident occurred during a period when Congress was scrutinizing military flight training costs and safety records. There was significant pressure to demonstrate strict adherence to established procedures and zero tolerance for unauthorized actions. The political timing had been catastrophic for Jessica's career, as her case became a symbol of either dangerous individualism or heroic initiative, depending on which perspective dominated the investigation. The review board had ultimately chosen to emphasize procedure compliance over results, sacrificing her flying career to demonstrate institutional commitment to regulatory authority. The final recommendation was removal from flight status and reassignment to maintenance duties, Jessica concluded. My flying career was over, and I was transferred to Nellis as an aircraft technician where I've spent the last 8 years working on the same aircraft I once flew. Captain Bradley absorbed the full scope of Jessica's story, recognizing the injustice of a system that had punished exceptional performance and innovative thinking in favor of bureaucratic compliance. Her account revealed exactly the kind of pilot judgment and technical capability that the Blue Angels valued most highly in their demonstration flying. "Jessica," Bradley said finally, "what you've described represents exactly the kind of decision-making and flying skill that we look for in Blue Angel's pilots. Your willingness to take calculated risks to protect others and your technical ability to execute complex maneuvers under pressure are precisely the qualities that define elite military aviation." The validation from someone of Bradley's stature created an emotional response that Jessica had been suppressing for 8 years. For the first time since the accident investigation, she was hearing from fellow pilots who understood the complexity of her decision and recognized the skill required to execute her emergency response successfully. Lieutenant Morrison added her own perspective as someone who had recently experienced a similar emergency situation. "Your response to Webb's crisis was exactly what I would hope my wingman would do if I faced the same situation. Military aviation requires pilots who can think independently and act decisively when procedures don't cover the specific circumstances they're facing." The conversation was interrupted when Master Sergeant Chen entered the briefing room carrying an urgent message from base operations. His expression indicated that something significant was developing that would require immediate attention from both the Blue Angels team and Jessica's maintenance expertise. The emergency alert that shattered the emotional breakthrough in the briefing room carried the distinctive urgency of a real crisis developing in real time. Master Sergeant Chen's weathered face showed the strain of someone who had been coordinating multiple emergency responses simultaneously while trying to locate personnel with the specific expertise needed to address an unprecedented situation. "Sir," Chen addressed Captain Bradley while glancing meaningfully at Jessica, "we have a developing crisis that requires immediate pilot consultation. A civilian Learjet with engine failure has declared an emergency, but the pilot is unconscious and the aircraft is being flown by a passenger with no flight training." The situation represented exactly the kind of nightmare scenario that tested every aspect of emergency response coordination. A high-performance business jet with an incapacitated pilot and an untrained person at the controls created dangers that extended far beyond the aircraft itself, particularly in the heavily populated airspace around Las Vegas, where any crash would likely involve civilian casualties. Major Stone immediately began coordinating with base operations through her secure communication device, accessing real-time information about the emergency aircraft's position, fuel status, and communication capabilities. The passenger is Dr. Amanda Foster, a cardiac surgeon from Phoenix who was returning from a medical conference in Seattle. She's been talking to air traffic control for the past 20 minutes, but she has no idea how to operate the aircraft systems. Jessica felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied aviation emergencies, her dormant pilot instincts automatically calculating the factors that would determine whether the situation could be resolved successfully. A Learjet 60 flown by someone with no training represented enormous challenges even under perfect conditions, and any complications could quickly escalate into catastrophic failure. "What's the pilot's condition?" Bradley asked, already shifting into the command mode that characterized his approach to crisis management. "Apparent heart attack about 40 minutes ago," Chen replied, consulting his emergency status board. Dr. Foster performed CPR and stabilized him medically, but he remains unconscious and unable to provide flight guidance. She's been keeping the aircraft level using autopilot, but she'll need to land soon because fuel is becoming critical. The medical emergency had created a situation where the passenger's professional skills had kept the pilot alive, but couldn't address the more immediate problem of landing a sophisticated aircraft that required expert knowledge of complex systems and procedures. Dr. Foster's medical training had been invaluable for treating the pilot, but it provided no preparation for the challenges of flying a high-performance jet. Lieutenant Morrison accessed the aircraft tracking display on the briefing room's main screen, showing the Learjet's current position approximately 60 miles northwest of Nellis, and maintaining straight and level flight under autopilot control. The aircraft's altitude and heading suggested that Dr. Foster was following air traffic control instructions, but her ability to execute the complex procedures required for emergency landing remained questionable. "How much flight time does she have remaining?" Jessica asked, her pilot training automatically focusing on the critical factor that would determine available options for resolving the crisis. "Approximately 90 minutes at current consumption rates," Stone replied, "but that assumes she can maintain optimal flight efficiency. Any deviation from prescribed altitudes or airspeeds could reduce her available time significantly." The fuel limitation created urgency that prevented extensive training or preparation for the emergency landing attempt. Dr. Foster would need to learn complex aircraft systems and landing procedures in less than an hour, while managing the stress of an emergency situation and caring for an unconscious patient. The learning curve was impossibly steep for someone with no aviation background. Captain Bradley recognized immediately that conventional emergency response procedures were inadequate for the unique circumstances of the crisis. Standard protocol involved talking untrained passengers through basic control inputs while emergency crews prepared for crash landing scenarios. But Learjet's sophisticated systems required more advanced guidance than basic instructions could provide. "We need someone who can provide expert consultation for Learjet systems and emergency procedures," Bradley said, looking directly at Jessica. "Someone with both technical knowledge and practical flying experience who can guide Dr. Foster through the landing process step by step." Jessica understood that Bradley was offering her an opportunity to use her flying skills for the first time in 8 years, but the circumstances were far more challenging than any emergency she had faced during her active flying career. Talking an untrained person through a jet landing via radio communication would require teaching complex procedures while managing the stress and confusion of someone who had never experienced aircraft controls. "Sir, I've maintained currency on Learjet systems through technical training programs," Jessica said carefully, "but I've never attempted to guide an untrained person through emergency landing procedures. The complexity of the aircraft systems and the precision required for landing approaches could be beyond what verbal instruction can achieve." Major Stone consulted additional emergency response resources, identifying potential alternatives that might provide additional support for the crisis. Edwards Air Force Base has qualified Learjet instructor pilots who could provide technical guidance, but the communication delay and lack of visual contact would limit their effectiveness. "We need someone who can establish direct communication and provide immediate response to developing situations." The discussion was interrupted when Dr. Foster's increasingly panicked voice came through the emergency communication system that had been patched into the briefing room. Her medical training had prepared her to remain calm during life-threatening emergencies, but the prospect of attempting to land an aircraft she didn't understand was pushing her beyond her professional composure. "Las Vegas approach. This is November 7-7 Alpha." Dr. Foster's voice carried obvious strain despite her efforts to maintain control. "The autopilot is making some kind of alarm sound, and I'm seeing warning lights that I don't understand. I need immediate assistance because I think something is going wrong with the aircraft." Jessica recognized the urgency in Dr. Foster's voice and understood that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Autopilot systems could fail unexpectedly, and warning lights indicated developing problems that could quickly escalate beyond manageable levels. Time was running out for coordinated response efforts. "Dr. Foster," Jessica said, taking control of the radio communication without waiting for authorization, "this is Jessica Harper at Nellis Air Force Base. I'm a pilot with extensive Learjet experience, and I'm going to help you get your aircraft safely on the ground. Can you tell me exactly what warning lights you're seeing?" The direct communication established an immediate connection between Jessica and Dr. Foster, providing the kind of personal contact that could maintain calm and focus during the crisis. Jessica's calm professionalism and obvious expertise came through clearly in her voice, offering reassurance that expert help was available. "There's a red light labeled fuel low and a yellow light that says autopilot," Dr. Foster replied, her voice stabilizing slightly in response to Jessica's confident tone. "The alarm sound is getting louder, and I can feel the aircraft starting to turn slightly to the right, even though I haven't touched any controls." Jessica immediately recognized the symptoms of autopilot degradation combined with fuel system problems that could quickly develop into complete system failure. The aircraft was beginning to deviate from controlled flight, and Dr. Foster would need to take manual control within minutes to prevent dangerous flight path deviations. "Dr. Foster, you're experiencing autopilot failure combined with low fuel warnings," Jessica explained calmly. "I'm going to talk you through taking manual control of the aircraft and guiding you to a safe landing at Nellis Air Force Base. The procedures are complex, but I'll be with you every step of the way." Captain Bradley and his team watched with growing respect as Jessica seamlessly transitioned from maintenance technician back into the pilot she had always been, taking command of the crisis with the professional competence that had characterized her flying career before the accident that forced her into exile. Her 8 years of technical experience had only enhanced her understanding of aircraft systems, making her uniquely qualified to guide Dr. Foster through the emergency. The next hour would test every aspect of Jessica's skills and determine whether her exceptional abilities could overcome the injustice that had grounded her, while potentially saving the lives of 2 people trapped in an aircraft that was rapidly becoming uncontrollable. "Dr. Foster, I need you to look at the instrument panel and find a round dial with numbers from 0 to 360, Jessica said, her voice carrying the calm authority that had characterized her flying during the most challenging missions of her military career. "That's your heading indicator, and it will tell us which direction the aircraft is pointing." The radio crackled with Dr. Foster's increasingly strained voice as she struggled to locate the requested instrument while managing her unconscious patient and fighting the growing turbulence that was making manual control more difficult. "I see it, but the numbers keep moving. It's showing 245 right now, but it was 238 a few seconds ago." Jessica recognized the symptoms of an aircraft in a gentle turn with an untrained person at the controls, a situation that could quickly develop into dangerous flight path deviations if not corrected immediately. "Dr. Foster, the aircraft is turning because the autopilot has failed, and you need to take manual control. Place your hands very gently on the control wheel in front of you, but don't make any sudden movements." Captain Bradley watched from the communications station as Jessica seamlessly transitioned into the role of emergency flight instructor, drawing on years of pilot training and technical expertise to guide someone through procedures that typically required months of professional education. Her approach was methodical and patient, breaking complex aircraft systems into manageable steps that a medical professional could understand and execute under extreme stress. "I can feel the wheel moving in my hands," Dr. Foster reported, her voice reflecting growing confidence as she established physical connection with the aircraft's control systems. "It's like the airplane is trying to turn right, and I have to hold pressure to keep it from continuing the turn." "That's exactly right," Jessica confirmed, recognizing that Dr. Foster was beginning to understand the relationship between control inputs and aircraft response. "You're feeling the natural stability of the aircraft, which wants to maintain straight flight. Very gentle pressure on the left side of the wheel will stop the turn and return you to straight and level flight." The guidance process required Jessica to think simultaneously like a pilot, a flight instructor, and an aircraft technician while maintaining calm communication with someone who was experiencing the most stressful situation of her professional life. Every instruction had to be precise and clear because misunderstanding could result in control inputs that would make the emergency unrecoverable. Lieutenant Morrison monitored the radar display that showed the Learjet's flight path gradually stabilizing as Dr. Foster implemented Jessica's instructions. "She's got it leveled off and maintaining heading," Morrison reported. "Jessica, your teaching technique is working. She's actually flying the aircraft." The successful establishment of manual control represented a crucial milestone in the emergency response, but Jessica knew that the most challenging phases were still ahead. Landing a high-performance jet required precise coordination of multiple systems and split-second timing that would test Dr. Foster's newly acquired flying skills to their absolute limits. "Dr. Foster, you're doing excellent work," Jessica said, reinforcing the confidence that would be essential for the complex procedures ahead. "Now we need to begin preparing for landing approach. Can you see the airspeed indicator, which looks like a round dial with numbers and a needle pointing to your current speed?" Major Stone coordinated with Nellis Air Traffic Control to clear all other aircraft from the approach pattern and prepare emergency response teams for the incoming Learjet. Fire trucks, ambulances, and crash recovery equipment were positioned along the runway while meteorological teams provided real-time wind and weather updates that would affect the landing attempt. "Airspeed is showing 185, Dr. Foster reported, her voice steadier now that she had successfully demonstrated her ability to control the aircraft manually. "The needle is steady, not bouncing around like it was when the autopilot was acting up." Jessica calculated the approach parameters in her mind, determining the optimal speed reductions and configuration changes that would give Drive Foster the best chance of executing a successful landing. The Learjet's approach speed was higher than most general aviation aircraft, requiring precise energy management that would challenge even experienced pilots. "Dr. Foster, we're going to begin a gradual descent toward Nellis Air Force Base," Jessica explained. "I need you to very gently pull the throttles back about 1 inch, which will reduce power and allow the aircraft to begin descending slowly." The power reduction went smoothly, with Dr. Foster demonstrating increasing confidence in her ability to make control inputs without causing dangerous aircraft reactions. Jessica monitored the descent through radar coordination with air traffic control, providing continuous guidance for altitude and airspeed management as the Learjet began its approach to the runway. "I can see lights ahead that look like an airport," Dr. Foster announced, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and apprehension as the destination became visible. There are a lot of flashing lights and what looks like emergency vehicles on the ground. Captain Bradley coordinated with the emergency response teams through his command radio, ensuring that medical personnel were prepared to treat the unconscious pilot immediately after landing, while crash rescue equipment stood ready in case the landing attempt was unsuccessful. The coordination required split-second timing between multiple agencies working together to provide maximum support for the emergency. "Those are the runway lights at Nellis," Jessica confirmed. "The emergency vehicles are there to help us, not because we expect problems. You're going to make a successful landing, Dr. Foster. Trust your training and follow my instructions exactly." The final approach phase required the most complex coordination between Jessica's guidance and Dr. Foster's control inputs, as multiple systems had to be managed simultaneously while maintaining precise flight path control. Jessica talked Dr. Foster through landing gear extension, flap configuration, and final approach speed reduction, with the patience of an experienced instructor despite the enormous pressure of the life-and-death situation. "Landing gear is down and locked. Green lights are showing," Dr. Foster reported with growing confidence. "Flaps are configured as you instructed, and airspeed is stable at 120 knots." Quote. Jessica felt the familiar surge of pride and satisfaction that accompanied successful emergency coordination, but she maintained focus on the critical final moments when split-second timing would determine whether the landing was successful or catastrophic. "Dr. Foster, you're lined up perfectly with the runway. When I tell you to reduce power, pull the throttles all the way back and let the aircraft settle onto the runway." The Learjet crossed the runway threshold at exactly the correct altitude and airspeed, with Dr. Foster demonstrating remarkable skill for someone who had learned to fly a sophisticated jet during the most stressful hour of her life. Jessica's guidance had been flawless, providing exactly the right information at precisely the right moments to enable successful completion of an impossible task. "Power back now," Jessica commanded as the aircraft reached the optimal touchdown point. Dr. Foster executed the final control input perfectly, reducing power smoothly and allowing the Learjet to settle onto the runway with a gentle touchdown that would have been creditable for an experienced professional pilot. The aircraft rolled straight down the center line as emergency vehicles converged to provide immediate assistance. The successful landing created an explosion of celebration in the Nellis Command Center, as personnel who had been following the emergency recognized the extraordinary achievement that had just been accomplished. Jessica had guided an untrained person through procedures that typically required years of professional education, saving 2 lives through a combination of technical expertise and exceptional teaching ability. Captain Bradley approached Jessica as the emergency response concluded, his expression reflecting profound respect for the performance he had just witnessed. "Jessica, what you accomplished today represents the highest levels of pilot skill and professionalism. You demonstrated exactly the qualities that the Blue Angels value most highly in our demonstration pilots." Lieutenant Morrison added her own perspective as someone who understood the complexity of the emergency coordination that Jessica had managed. "Your ability to teach complex flying procedures under extreme pressure while maintaining calm communication shows exceptional leadership and technical competence. You handled that emergency better than most instructor pilots could have managed." Quote, the validation from fellow pilots who understood the difficulty of what she had accomplished created an emotional breakthrough that Jessica had been hoping for throughout 8 years of professional exile. For the first time since her flying career had been destroyed by bureaucratic injustice, she was receiving recognition from peers who appreciated both her technical abilities and her judgment under pressure. "Dr. Foster," Jessica said into the radio as the Learjet came to a complete stop, "you just accomplished something that most people would consider impossible. Your performance today was outstanding, and you should be proud of what you achieved under extremely difficult circumstances." The successful emergency response had demonstrated conclusively that Jessica's flying abilities remained at elite levels despite 8 years away from cockpits, and that her combination of pilot skills and technical knowledge made her uniquely valuable for challenging aviation assignments. The Blue Angels team had witnessed firsthand the exceptional capabilities that had been wasted by institutional failure to recognize true merit. Major Stone approached with official paperwork that would formalize Jessica's reinstatement to flight status and her assignment to the Blue Angels demonstration team as a replacement pilot for Lieutenant Morrison's temporarily grounded position. "Jessica, based on your performance today and our evaluation of your background, Captain Bradley is offering you the opportunity to return to active flying duty with the Navy's premier demonstration squadron." The offer represented complete vindication of the decisions that had ended Jessica's Air Force career and validation that exceptional performance could ultimately overcome bureaucratic injustice. Standing in the same briefing room where she had been questioned about her true identity just hours earlier, Jessica Harper realized that her 8 years of exile had finally ended. "I accept," Jessica said simply, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had proven her worth under the most demanding circumstances possible. The woman who had spent 8 years hiding her identity as a former pilot while working as an aircraft maintenance technician had reclaimed her place among the elite aviators who represented the pinnacle of military flying achievement. Excellence had indeed triumphed over adversity, guided by skill, determination, and the unwavering support of fellow pilots who recognized true merit when they encountered it. 6 months later, Lieutenant Commander Jessica Harper flew her first Blue Angels demonstration in the same Nevada skies where she had once guided a desperate civilian to safety, her aircraft painted in the distinctive blue and gold that marked her as one of the most elite pilots in the world. The maintenance coveralls had been replaced by the flight suit she had always been meant to wear, and the dreams that had been deferred for 8 years had finally been fulfilled through perseverance and exceptional performance under pressure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.